Wildfires were blazing across Canada last spring at an alarming rate. However, before any investigations were completed into what actually caused the wildfires in the first place, the Liberal establishment in this country were so confident. They just knew that climate change was the culprit.
Year after year, with climate change, we're seeing more and more intense wildfires.
And with the accelerating impact of climate change, we very much will continue to do so moving forward.
Part of this is because of climate change, and that we collectively, certainly in Canada and around the world, need to do more and accelerate the fight against climate change.
Clearly, this government has not taken the climate crisis seriously. Their actions show that very clearly. Our country is literally on fire, and this Liberal government thinks that business as usual is fine.
Prime Minister is right about this one thing. Climate change is real, but the policies of the current government do not meet the requirements of the moment. We're in a climate emergency. Our eyes are burning in this place. The parliamentary Ottawa bubble has been pierced by the forest fires across this country, and yet in this place, the debates are inane. Please, will the Prime Minister commit to cancelling the Trans Mountain Pipeline, protecting the northeastern slope of Newfoundland from oil and gas development?
As the wildfires were raging and as thick smoke blanketed over Toronto, Ottawa, New York, and Philadelphia, the legacy media and the Liberal politicians had the perfect visual for them to fearmonger the public into accepting their climate change measures. The only problem for Canada's progressive politicians who had this truly golden opportunity in their hands to advance their climate change agenda was that the public was just not really buying the explanation that the media and the politicians were trying to sell. They never actually fully bought into the idea that climate change, the mysterious, menacing force of climate change, was behind all of these wildfires. And sure enough, just like so many stories over the past few years, the legacy media and the politicians were proven wrong, and the public were proven right. Nova Scotia police have arrested a 22-year-old man for starting the province's largest ever wildfire. And a few days before that, a Quebec man pleaded guilty to starting 14 wildfires during the same time. So it really was arson after all that. Drop a like in the video, help us out by subscribing to the True North YouTube channel, and the comment question for the episode is this: will we see more arrests in the coming days linked to the 2023 wildfire season? Let me know your answer below, and let's get into it. Well, committing crimes in order to advance your climate change agenda is not a foreign concept to Justin Trudeau's climate change minister, Stephen Guilbeault. It's one that he's quite familiar with. And it appears that's exactly what happened in Nova Scotia and Quebec in the spring of 2023. From The Guardian last Thursday, Nova Scotia man charged with starting province's largest ever wildfire. Dalton Clark Stewart, 22, accused of lighting Canada's Barrington Lake fire, which burned for 1 month in 2023. The wildfire near Barrington Lake caught the attention of officials in May. Unseasonably dry conditions and strong winds helped it grow to 23,525 hectares, shattering a 5-decade record and pushing Nova Scotia's scarce firefighting resources to the brink. At the time, more than 18,000 people in Nova Scotia were under an evacuation order, and more than 200 structures, the majority of them were homes, were destroyed by these wildfires. If you recall, the Canadian government had to bring in firefighters from Australia and South Africa to help us solve what was going on. The military was deployed all across the country to deal with these wildfires. So playing political games, as the legacy media and the political class did, and using this tragedy to advance their political agenda, is now turning out to be even more disgraceful than it was at the time. Now, the other major wildfire in Nova Scotia at the time was the Tantalon fire. According to this Guardian article, the RCMP, the feds, dropped their arson investigations into the Tantalon fire in December. However, Nova Scotia's Provincial Natural Resources Department have kept their investigation open and are still looking for people who might be responsible. Nova Scotia Liberal MP Sean Fraser, the then immigration minister at the time, wasted no time when Nova Scotia was battling these wildfires before getting up in the House of Commons, talking about how his community is literally on fire and attacking the Conservatives for not accepting the Liberal Party climate change agenda.
I came to Ottawa this morning from my home province of Nova Scotia, where our communities are literally on fire. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are peddling policies that they know will increase the level of pollution that is causing these severe weather events.
As though that has anything to do with the Nova Scotia wildfires. For these guys, any time seems to be a good time to make a political argument against your political opposition. The only problem for Sean Fraser was that everything he said turned out to be false. All of this comes just days after a Quebec man pleaded guilty to setting 14 forest fires in the spring of 2023. Brian Perret, 38, pleaded guilty today to 13 counts of arson and 1 count of arson with disregard for human life at the courthouse in Chibougamau, Quebec. And if you will recall, it wasn't just the politicians who were enforcing the climate change narrative. The legacy media, spearheaded by the CBC of course, went on one of their fact-checking rampages, accusing anyone, including alternative media news organizations, who didn't accept that climate change was solely responsible for these wildfires, of spreading, you guessed it, conspiracy theories. Take a look at this segment in the CBC where investigative journalist Justin Ling, who was wrong on almost everything he said during the Freedom Convoy in 2022, is wrong once again on the wildfire story in 2023. Take a look at this, where he accuses Rebel News of spreading conspiracy theories for reporting that arson was being investigated as the reason for the Nova Scotia wildfires.
There's a lot of people out there who are looking at these fires and who see an alternate explanation. A lot of them point to arson, right? There's some folks out there who just don't want to accept that climate change is part of the explanations. You go higher up this sort of food chain and you see some conspiracy theorists who believe that there is a deeper plot, that there's folks out there who are using these fires to advance their climate agenda.
And is this a small group of people, a large group of people?
We're talking about hundreds of thousands, probably more like millions of people who are at the very least listening to and engaging with these influencers and conspiracy theorists. A lot of this disinformation is taking place on Twitter, but also alternative social media platforms like Rumble and Telegram. It is a significant enough group of people that we should probably be concerned at the proliferation of some of this misinformation. On the Rebel, you had this rather alarmist story that said Nova Scotia RCMP blame arson for multiple wildfires. And the Rebel basically pushing the idea that there was somebody individual responsible for all these fires. They later had to correct this story as the RCMP clarified that those fires had nothing to do with the wildfires, that arson was not responsible for the forest fires in Nova Scotia.
Hold on. Say that one more time for me, CBC. I want to hear what you just said one more time.
That arson was not responsible for the forest fires in Nova Scotia.
Well, isn't that awkward for the CBC?
Last year was Canada's worst wildfire season on record, and today we learned who is being accused of causing one of the largest. Here's CTV's Krisa Najkate.
The largest wildfire in Nova Scotia's history, officials say, has been caused by a single person.
Now, maybe the reason why the public just didn't seem to buy the climate change narrative about the wildfires in 2023 was because despite what the media and despite what the politicians think about Canadians aren't stupid. They know their facts. According to the government of Alberta, the majority of wildfires are started by humans. In fact, last year, over 60% of wildfires in Alberta were human-caused. We all need to do our part in reducing the number of these entirely preventable fires. Now, that 60% number by the government of Alberta might actually be understated, because according to the United States National Park Service, close to 85% of all wildfires are caused by humans. Now in June, the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre published this graph showing that the vast majority of wildfires in 2023, up until that point, were human-caused. And that same federal department found that in 2022, the year before, in Nova Scotia, the overwhelming majority of wildfires were either intentionally set by arsonists or they were set because of land clearing. And check this out. According to the most up-to-date data from the National Forestry Database, 2020 saw the fewest wildfires recorded in at least the previous 40 years. How's that for climate change, huh? And you know what else happened in 2020? Nobody left their homes for an entire year because we were all forced to stay inside due to the pandemic. But of course, because Elizabeth May's eyes were burning in Ottawa, we have to cancel the new pipeline projects being built. Vancouver Island was also hit by several devastating wildfires in June last year. But according to Jade Richardson, the fire information officer at the Coastal Fire Center, all 46 Vancouver Island wildfires up until that point were human-caused. None were naturally caused. Now that the narrative that climate change magically set all these forests ablaze across Canada in June of 2023 seems to be falling apart, Trudeau's climate change minister, Stephen Guilbeault, seems to be feeling the heat. In an act of comedic denial, Stephen Guilbeault took to Twitter 2 days ago to attack the Alberta provincial government for not taking climate change seriously after the worst wildfire season on record. After a summer of the worst wildfires on record, it couldn't be more clear that addressing the climate change crisis and building a stronger economy of the future requires an all-hands-on-deck effort. But it's clear some would prefer to chart a more reckless course. Instead of spreading misinformation, I think Canadians would prefer to see Danielle Smith and Poilievre actually coming forward with concrete policies that get to the heart of people's concerns about ensuring a stronger, healthier, and more secure future. The narrative is falling apart on these Liberals. Arsonists have pleaded guilty to setting wildfires off in Quebec, and an arrest was just made in Nova Scotia. Canadians just don't buy this nonsense anymore. Albertans were told to limit their electricity use during the coldest day in the winter because the government shut down coal plants. The federal government wants to mandate that all new vehicles sold by 2035 are electric cars. Canadians who are already stretched too thin are having to pay carbon taxes just to stay warm during the winter. And now the federal government, in their infinite wisdom in their quest to solve climate change, wants to charge bagel shops and pizzerias who use wood-fired ovens for air pollution. I guess if we all just drove electric vehicles, cooked on electric stovetops, shut down those evil pizzerias and bagel shops who use wood-fired ovens, we just wouldn't be seeing wildfires anymore because, of course, climate change is the culprit, and this is going to solve climate change. Guilbeault is getting absolutely ratioed here by the Canadian public, 2.8 thousand replies to only 718 likes. Jordan Peterson dunked on Guilbeault here with 6.3 thousand likes in his own quote tweet. How about that arson, buddy? But don't let the now evident facts stop you from terrorizing your would-be slaves. Viva Fry as well with 3.4 thousand likes on his quote tweet. Repeat a lie often enough and people will believe it. Well, only dumb liberals will believe it, and dishonest liberals will continue to repeat it. Congrats, Guilbeault. You are a dishonest liberal, although those terms are pretty much synonymous at this point in time. And here's Dan McTeague, the gas price wizard. You've chosen to ignore the fact that most forest fires this summer were human-induced, either through carelessness or set deliberately. You also contend that carbon taxes reduce greenhouse gases and that most get back more than they pay. Is it your aim to lie about everything? It kind of appears that that is the case, isn't it? All right, everyone, that's going to do it for us today on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Harrison Faulkner, and this is Ratio.